Okay, welcome to the Harlem Emergency Network COVID-19 update for May 27th, 2020. I'm Bob Ponce, and I'm going to see if I can bring Carol Johnson in. Carol, are you there? Can we hear you?
I'm here.
Okay, great. So, let's get things started today. I want to talk about since this is this was Memorial Day this weekend, and it's a time when we remember, and obviously we have a lot of people who lost their lives in our community over the last couple of months to COVID-19. And I want us to remember them. Obviously, we can't remember all of them by name, but I want to reference them. According to numbers released by the city, we had 683 deaths in Harlem, and I'm going to go by the zip code and talk about the numbers. Um, the leading zip code was 10029 with 182 lives lost. You might want to weigh in on that, Carol, since that's your zip code.
Yeah, good morning, Bob. Thanks for doing this again in these weekly broadcasts, and hopefully people are paying attention, particularly if you live in these hot spots. It's pretty clear to understand why it is what it is. The response for testing, the response for PPE, for getting information out to our community was extremely slow, way
Mhm.
behind everyone else. People didn't clearly understand what was going on because everything kept changing on a daily basis. You
Mhm.
know, information kept changing. But at the same time, the rest of the city was responded to as rapidly as they possibly could based on something that constantly morphed. Um, So we were left behind in everything. The largest accumulation of housing projects was left out when it came time to testing. Once the NYCHA initiative for testing and issuing PPE was issued, and we were still looking for items. We're still looking for emergency items. We were still looking for food. We were still looking for testing sites.
Mhm.
So it's pretty evident why it ended up the way it did.
Yeah. Now, some of the other zip codes that also had extreme loss of life. 10031 had 112 people lost. 10035 had 101 lost. 10027 had 96 losses. 10337 had 63 losses. 10039 had 49 losses, and 1030 had 43 losses. So these all added up to 683 losses in Harlem. And obviously, we're still coming to grips with that. I don't think I know anyone who has not lost a friend or a loved one, and unfortunately, many of us have had multiple losses in their circle of family and friends.
Right. And you have to tie 101, 10029 and 10035 together because they both are East Harlem.
Right. So that is just an
200
extreme
lives.
concentration in that area, and what we also have seen is that um, the city and state have been slow to get their resources to the places where they're needed most. And that's something that we have to contend with and still continue to raise our voice on it. Um, let's also talk a little bit more about the current numbers and situation. As we always do, we try to update and look at the numbers as we see it. That had the wrong date on it. Today is the 27th. And let's look at the public health milestones from the city, and we'll take a quick look at those together. Hang on, let me bring that up. Okay, here we go. So, this is we look at this every week because these are the milestones that the city set early on that they wanted to look at and keep an eye on before opening the city up. As it says, New York City is closely monitoring key public health signs to determine whether certain social physical distancing restrictions will be lifted for people who are not at high risk for serious complications of COVID-19. And so, one of the ones that's very positive is that they wanted to see the percent of people who New York City residents who test positive to be below a certain number, and we've been below that number uh, for over 10 days now. My screen is refreshing. Bear with me. Okay, here we go. All right, we'll start with hospital admissions. And so they wanted hospital admissions on a daily basis to be below 200 people a day. We have been well below 100 people a day for the last 10 days. And we've been below 200 for probably maybe close to a month now. So that's actually very, very good. Um, and we always look here because we want to watch these numbers to make sure that as the weather gets warm and people are coming out, that we don't see this number come back up. And so as of now, we've still kept it well under 100. We'll keep watching this number because we know with Memorial Day and more people coming out and people relaxing their vigilance on social distancing and wearing masks, our biggest concern is a second wave, and so we're keeping an eye on this number. But so far, so good. The second milestone was critical care. This is a milestone that they haven't quite reached where they had set it. They wanted it to be below 375 people in critical care across New York City health and hospitals. We have come close to it, but we've never been below that number. And so that's something that is concerning, that there's still a number of people in critical care, but the number is not increasing. It's definitely flattened out, and it's, as you're seeing, it's maintaining kind of a flat trend, but above what they originally set it for. And then the final one was testing in New York City. This is actually the best good news because this was the one that it took a little while to get there. But as we can see over the last 10 days, we are well below the 15% mark that they set. And it looks like we've continued to stay underneath that. So that's also a good sign, but we got to keep an eye on it because, as you can see, the last couple of days, there's a little bit of an uptick there. So we're going to keep an eye on that. So again, the good news is that our numbers are much better than they have been, and that means that we're in much better position. But we continue to advise people, continue to social distance, continue to, practice, don't forget everything that you learned during this. It's important for us to I I knocked myself off the screen there for a second. Too many buttons. The practices that we came up with during this crisis. Okay, hold up. Okay, we got a little bit of okay. We got some feedback there. Let's see. Okay. This is okay.
They're actually working on my roof, so I don't know how noisy that's going to get.
Okay. Well, we'll work our way through it. It's a live broadcast, and that's part and parcel of what is part of a live broadcast. Um, okay, so I'm going to put you temporarily on mute and bring you back in. The next thing we want to talk about, we want to give a couple of announcements. Um, okay. All right. So we got some information from the New York State Prison Coalition, Response Coalition. And what we want to share with you is that they they have a survey now, and you can find the survey on their Facebook page, or you can go to the address that's on the screen. Uh, that takes you directly to the survey. And the reason for the survey is for if you have a family member or a friend who is either works in the prison system or is incarcerated, we want you to go and fill out that survey so we can have more information on what your experiences have been regarding the prison system and COVID-19. So if you could either go to facebook.com/NYSPCRC, or if you can go to the other address, which will lead you right to the form bit.ly/NYS prison survey. And that will take you to the form, and we want to collect that information. Um, the other announcement we have, and one's from the safety net activists. And this one's talking about a bill that is in the city council now, and the bill is called 1927A. And this is a bill to get the city to utilize hotel rooms to house homeless during this pandemic, because homeless obviously don't have a place to go shelter during this. And this would use some of the excess capacity to help us keep people off the streets. And keeping homeless off the streets also protects us all, because it prevents them from having nowhere to go and potentially spreading the virus. So you can find more about this at 1927saveslives.org. Um, and we urge you to call your city council member to advocate for them to vote on this bill. So do that today, because this is considered currently. Let's see. I'm going to see if I can bring Carol back onto this. Let's see. Okay, Carol, can we hear you?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, and you sound wonderful. That's great. So let's talk about testing. So the city has been more. They've set up a lot more testing facilities, and you can find information by going to nyc.gov/COVID-19, and they have information where they can tell you all the places where you can get tested for free. Now, Carol, let's talk a little bit about the antibodies testing versus COVID-19 testing, because that may be confusing. So, um, COVID-19 testing is a test to see if you're symptomatic and you want to find out if you have the virus. You definitely want to get that test. Antibody testing is to see if you've been exposed to it and your body has produced the antibodies. Antibody testing is good news if you test positive, because it means your body has protection against the antibodies. So it's something that people can get this test to find out, and it will give you a sense of peace of mind, I guess, knowing that your body has the antibodies, and it should protect you from any further infection. But we also want to we are starting to look into a little bit more about the antibodies testing, because we want to know more about who is getting the information and what they're doing with it. And you know, in the past, people in our communities have often been used without our knowledge and consent for medical research. There was a very famous case of a woman called Henrietta Lacks, um, whose uh, whose cells have been used to have many breakthroughs in cancer research. But those cells were taken from her without her knowledge or consent. And while there are people who have made millions, if not billions, of dollars from her research, none of that was shared with her or her family. So we want to start to create an awareness around antibodies testing. We definitely recommend it, and we're not suggesting anyone should not get antibody tests. But I think if you get an antibody test, you want to ask as much information as you can about who is getting the information from the test. I have not done it, and so I don't have direct experience. But we will ask that anyone who does, if you want to share information for us, you can send that information to us at Harlem Emergency Network. I'm going to put our email address on the screen as well. So we want to learn a little bit more about this process, and we want to find out, because we're going into an era where we need to be concerned not only with our medical condition, but we also want to know what's happening in terms of our personal medical information. There are rules and regulations regarding privacy and medical information, and yet those rules are probably not being adhered to during this time of COVID-19. There's a lot of activity around contact tracing, but no one has really indicated how that fits with what they call HIPAA regulations, which are supposed to regulate and keep privacy information safe. But when the contact tracing is being done by these technological organizations such as Google, they don't fall under HIPAA regulations. And so we need to know a lot more about how our data is being used, who gets access to it. And we need to have this conversation as a community and really start having it now amongst ourselves and with our elected officials. Carol, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and actually, what process will they use to store that information? There was a question as to how long would that information be in the system. You know, um, are you going to be listed? Like I remember with the AIDS crises, people were listed as numbers.
Hmm.
You had to keep the information private. But where this is concerned, there's just so many organizations that's involved, and you don't know who the lead organization is going to be sharing this information. So it
Hmm.
makes sense that people are really leery about this. Also, considering that this is the time of, like hackathons 2020 seems to be the year of hackathons.
Yeah.
Everything is being integrated.
Mm-hmm.
All you have to do is Google somebody and you can pretty much pull up all of their information.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so people are very, very fearful of that. And I think they really, really need to work on a concerted effort to get this stuff together so that they can give you solid information. Because it seems like whenever someone comes up with something and they think that we should just go along with it, but you have to look at the concerns and their vital concerns.
Yeah, I'm going to read something. This is from a website called Health Affairs, healthaffairs.org. And they do an article talking about protecting privacy in digital contact tracing for COVID 19. And so I'm just going to read a paragraph. So, in the United States, digital contact tracing falls into a strange category in which at times it is governed by the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA, but at times not. There are efforts led by the Senate to implement data privacy regulations to more broadly cover digital contact tracing. Unfortunately, these efforts would create an unworkable regulatory patchwork in conjunction with HIPAA. We should rethink our approach to the governance of digital contact tracing to create one regulatory regimen to oversee these programs. So, in other words, what they're saying, um, if the information is being collected by Google, they're not they're not subject to HIPAA regulations. So these are things that we have to really look at, and not just give our information without finding where it's going, and demand some transparency and accountability of this information, because this information, the first use of the information obviously is very, very important. The idea that um, we can use these digital tools to find out who somebody is contacted with, but consider how that's happening. When you're talking about digital contact tracing, it basically means you are putting your phone and your identity in the system as having had COVID 19, as and it's also connecting you to whoever you are connected to digitally, and it's also following you around through what they call geolocation. So one of the things is that if you, let's say, you know somebody who tested positive for COVID 19 and you had a contact with them. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to be brought into that sphere, and then it's going to look at people who are near you on the phone. And if I'm, let's say, 6 feet away from you, all of a sudden, do I get an alert saying, "Oh, I'm near somebody who was exposed to somebody with COVID-19"? It seems like it's got that type of capability that it can be very, very intrusive, and with very, very little control over where who has this information, where it's going. So we are looking further at this. This is, I would say, we're in the early part of our investigation, if you will, but we want to start the conversation and raise the concerns, as we interact with our different communities, that this is something that we want to be concerned with. What happens to our data, especially medical data, and who is using it, and if someone is gets an opportunity to use it, particularly going back to antibodies, if somebody tests positive for the antibodies, how does that impact research? If a person's being used for research, we also need to have a conversation about what happens to that, and if that is monetized, how does that monetization help the people whose blood or DNA is used to for that monetization? We do not want to have another Henrietta Lacks situation. And the reason why we bring it up is because we here in New York, and particularly in Harlem and the Bronx, in our communities, we probably have the largest body of antibodies against COVID-19 in the world right now. So best believe someone's coming to look for us. So we should be prepared and figure out what the implications of that are for our community. So I think it's about time for us to wrap up. Carol, do you have any other information that we should be sharing today?
Well, I still can't stress enough, as when you open the show, that we need to maintain universal precautions.
Hmm.
We have to look at the fact that it's going to get much warmer. This past weekend, people were out barbecuing in the park, in the housing developments. They were selling meals and everything. Everybody was on top of each other. But I think it's sort of apparent that there's more people walking around with the antibody than those that's infected. Now, if you look at that someone looks absolutely normal, they have absolutely no symptoms, and they're going to hang out with their friend, and their friend happens to be around someone who is COVID positive, and then you come back home to your wife or your husband or your significant other and leave it there, and you're still running around without masks. The mask is to protect other people. We have to be respectful of other people. And we have to think in terms of, I'm putting my family at risk. If you can't think about yourself, think about the risk you're putting your family at. I'm very skeptical about um, a temperature taking at the hospitals and different locations. That's the go ahead that you should go to work. But if someone is asymptomatic and they have no temperature, you're still allowing them into the workforce. That's a very scary, and frightening fact, because now I'm hearing more and more about home health aides that have to take their temperature before they go into patient homes. My brother's godmother lived 89 years as a healthy person and got the infection from her aide and died. So, there's so much that they need to do, but I think they're all over the place. If they could just pull this operation together, there's been too much time. They need to pull this together and start working together. All of the agencies need to work together so that they can give us beneficial information and life-saving information, and really take a good look at what their protocols are.
Hmm.
So I mean, I know people who are tested, they're asymptomatic, and I ask them, "Have you ever had a fever? Do you take your temperature?" I have a normal low-grade temperature, 97.6. It's still 97.6, but they have had COVID.
Hmm.
And the other flip side of that is, even with the antibody test, they said there's three forms. You have people with low antibodies, moderate, and then you have people with strong antibodies. So now they're saying people with even the strongest antibodies, they're coming back to the hospitals COVID positive.
Hmm.
So there's no proof that the antibodies protect you from, number one, getting it again. Number two, infecting people. Just because you have the antibodies does not mean you don't have or haven't been exposed, and you cannot still expose somebody else. So we got to be vigilant,
Hmm.
pay attention.
And the final thing I also want to say, and this is something we've been saying since early March, tune up your immune system with proper eating, vitamins, and nutrients. In particular, we talked about vitamin C and D. Since we've been talking about that, we have been vindicated and verified by a number of studies that showed that The vast majority of people who died from this virus were vitamin D deficient, and that people who were vitamin D sufficient, which is very few people in this country, there is a mass vitamin D deficiency. But the people who were sufficient with vitamin D in their system had a much better rate of recovery than people without. And so we continue to urge you to get your vitamin D. You can get your vitamin D from the sun. If you're going to be outside, we still recommend you do your social distancing, but vitamin D from the sun is your best bet. You can get it from a number of different food sources. You can get it from supplements. But make sure that you have this in your system. If you go to the doctor, make sure they give you a vitamin D test to see what your levels are. Every person of color, when they go to the doctor, should be getting vitamin D tests to see where you are, and then you can respond accordingly. Because vitamin D is a substance that you can take too much of it, but right now most people are deficient, so it's better to err on the side of getting it in your system and keeping it in your system. Vitamin D stays in your system a lot better than vitamin D, but you do have to get it in there regularly. And so these are the things we encourage everybody at this point in time to really take nutrition seriously, because remember, COVID-19 could be just a dress rehearsal. No matter what they say or what they're doing, we could easily see another virus that's entirely different. And if you're not building up your immune system, all this that they're doing for COVID-19, they could come out with a vaccine, and then this virus either mutates, or another coronavirus or a virus of another type comes. If your immune system is not ready to handle it, you know, it's not going to help you. So we encourage everybody to be vigilant about your health. Start eating the right things, taking the nutrients, exercising, getting proper sleep and rest, and removing stress from your life. If you haven't figured that one out, it's very important.
And let's not forget that flu season is on its way too.
Hmm.
So there's so many different things to contend with. But I
Hmm.
suggest that, if you're not an essential worker and you can pick and choose when you go out, look outside and see what your surroundings are. There's certain times of the day when the streets are less crowded. Like now, my streets are empty. 12 o'clock, that's not going to be the case. So
Hmm.
if you're an early riser, get out there and get that breath of fresh air and get that vitamin D earlier in the day. Find locations that are not crowded. Like, I'm thankful that I use a scooter. My scooter shows me, because the infrastructure is so messed up. I find different ways to navigate on the sidewalks.
Hmm.
So a lot of times the areas that I'm going through are less traveled because the infrastructure is so much better.
Hmm.
So I find streets that are almost empty, and that's where I go and I get my air.
Hmm.
So just watch your surroundings, but just be careful, people. Just be careful. Please keep those face coverings on, no matter what. And if you could stay 10 to 12 feet away from people, that would even be better. But make sure you at least keep that 6 foot distance and
Okay.
wash your hands
Mhm.
diligently.
So this has been the Harlem Emergency Network COVID-19 update. We will be back again next week, same time, 9:30 a.m. Live on Facebook and YouTube. If you have information that you think we should share, you can see our email address underneath the screen, harlememergencynetwork@gmail.com. Send us an email with your announcement, and we will try to get it as part of the next broadcast. Thanks for watching and listening, and we will see you again next week.
Take care, everyone. Be safe.